When I returned from my heart surgery, I found my clothes on the street with a note from my daughter. "I don't have money to support a sick leech. Go find a nursing home." I went to live on the streets and bought a single lottery ticket until... Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. The taxi pulled away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with my hospital discharge papers still clutched in my trembling hand. 3 weeks of recovery from open-heart surgery, 3 weeks of believing my daughter Rebecca was taking care of my apartment while I fought for my life. The morning sun felt harsh against my pale skin as I looked up at the building where I'd lived for the past 15 years. That's when I saw them, my clothes, scattered across the concrete like discarded memories. My favorite blue cardigan, the one my late wife Martha had given me for our 20th anniversary, lay crumpled near a fire hydrant. My work boots, still sturdy despite their age, sat beside a pile of old photographs that fluttered in the morning breeze. My heart, still tender from the surgeon's knife, began to race in a way that terrified me. I bent down slowly, my chest aching with each movement, and picked up a wrinkled piece of paper that had been tucked under my reading glasses. "Dad, I can't afford to take care of a sick leech anymore. Find yourself a nursing home or something. Don't contact me. Rebecca." The words hit me harder than the heart attack that had nearly killed me 2 months ago. I read the note again, hoping I'd misunderstood, hoping the medication was making me see things that weren't there. But the cruel handwriting was unmistakably hers, the same careful script she'd used to write thank you cards when she was 12. I looked around the empty street, expecting hidden cameras, expecting this to be some terrible joke. But there was only silence and the weight of 61 years crashing down on me like a collapsed building. A neighbor I barely knew walked by with her dog, glancing at me with the kind of pity reserved for broken things. I wanted to explain that this was a mistake, that my daughter loved me, that I'd raised her alone after Martha died when Rebecca was only 8. I wanted to tell her about the 2 jobs I'd worked, about the nights I'd stayed up helping with homework, about every birthday party I'd scraped together money for. Instead, I just stood there holding that note, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. The memories came flooding back as I gathered my scattered belongings. Rebecca at 5 climbing into my lap after a nightmare, whispering, "Daddy, don't let the monsters get me." Rebecca at graduation, tears in her eyes as she thanked me for everything. Rebecca bringing her first boyfriend home, squeezing my hand under the dinner table when he made a good impression. When had I become the monster she needed protection from? I found a garbage bag in the building's dumpster and began collecting my life from the pavement. Each item felt heavier than it should have. The prescription bottles from my surgery rattled as I placed them carefully in the bag. Heart medication, blood thinners, painkillers, all of it useless now because where would I store them? Where would I take them? My brother Marcus lived 3 hours away in his perfect suburban home with his perfect wife and perfect children. We hadn't spoken since Martha's funeral, not because we'd fought, but because we'd simply drifted into different worlds. He'd built a successful insurance company while I'd spent my life working at the railroad, choosing steady work over big dreams because I had a daughter to raise. I tried calling him from the payphone on the corner, my fingers shaking as I dialed. The phone rang 4 times before his secretary answered. "Marcus Henley's office. How may I help you?" "This is Donald, his brother. It's an emergency." "I'm sorry, but Mr. Henley is in meetings all day. Can I take a message?" I opened my mouth to explain about the heart surgery, about being homeless, about needing help, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I hung up and stood there listening to the dial tone, understanding that I was more alone than I'd ever imagined possible. By noon, I'd managed to stuff everything that remained of my life into 2 garbage bags and an old suitcase with a broken wheel. The apartment building's manager, a thin woman with kind eyes, found me sitting on the front steps. "Mr. Henley, I'm so sorry. Your daughter, she said you'd decided to move out. She collected all the deposits and said you wouldn't be back." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Rebecca had thought of everything. She'd taken my security deposit, probably cleaned out whatever small savings I'd left in the apartment. She'd erased me as efficiently as deleting a phone number. "Where will you go?" the manager asked gently. I looked down the street. watching people hurry past with purposes and destinations, all of them going somewhere they belonged. For the first time in my adult life, I had no answer to give. The first night was the worst. I found myself in Riverside Park, sitting on a bench that faced the duck pond where I used to bring Rebecca when she was small. She'd throw breadcrumbs to the ducks and ask me endless questions about why they could swim and we couldn't, why they flew south, whether they remembered her from visit to visit. Now those same ducks ignored me as I tried to make myself comfortable on the wooden slats. Every position sent sharp pains through my chest where the surgeon had cracked my ribs open. The heart medication made me dizzy, but I didn't dare skip a dose. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was keeping my heart healthy so I could live long enough to die slowly on the streets. Around midnight, a police officer approached. He was young, probably younger than Rebecca, with concerned eyes that reminded me of the social worker who'd tried to help after Martha died. "You can't sleep here, sir. It's against city ordinance." I showed him my hospital bracelet, explained about the surgery, about having nowhere else to go. He listened with the patience of someone who'd heard similar stories before. "There's a shelter on 5th Street, he said, writing the address on a piece of paper. "They have a waiting list, but if you get there early, sometimes they have day of openings." The shelter was a converted warehouse that smelled of disinfectant and unwashed humanity. Men of all ages sat on plastic chairs, some talking to invisible companions, others staring at nothing with the hollow expressions of people who'd given up hope. I filled out paperwork with hands that shook from more than just the cold. "Heart surgery?" the intake worker asked, glancing at my medical bracelet. 3 weeks ago." She frowned, looking at forms on her desk. "We're full tonight, but you need medical supervision. Let me make some calls." Aloha. I spent that night in a room at the YMCA, paid for by some emergency fund the shelter administered. It was clean but sterile, with thin walls that let me hear every cough and conversation from neighboring rooms. I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how Rebecca was sleeping in what used to be my apartment. The next morning brought my first follow-up appointment with Dr. Martinez, my cardiologist. I took 3 buses to get there, arriving sweaty and exhausted. The receptionist looked at me with barely concealed alarm. I must have looked exactly like what I was. A homeless man who hadn't showered in 2 days. "Mr. Henley, you look tired," Dr. Martinez said when he finally saw me. "How's your recovery going?" I almost laughed at the question. How do you tell your doctor that recovery is impossible when you're living on park benches? How do you explain that stress is unavoidable when your own daughter has thrown you away like garbage? "I'm managing," I lied. He checked my blood pressure and frowned. "This is elevated. Are you taking your medications on schedule? Getting proper rest?" I nodded, another lie. The truth was I'd missed 2 doses already because I'd been too tired to dig through my bag in the dark to find the bottles. "Your next appointment is in 2 weeks. If these numbers don't improve, we might need to adjust your treatment." He handed me a business card. "There's a social worker here who specializes in post-surgical support. Would you like to speak with her?" I took the card but knew I wouldn't use it. What would I tell her? That my daughter, the person I'd sacrificed everything for, had decided I wasn't worth the trouble of keeping alive. Walking back to the bus stop, I passed a coffee shop where I used to take Rebecca for hot chocolate after her piano lessons. Through the window, I could see a father helping his young daughter with homework, both of them laughing at something on the page. The scene was so familiar, it felt like looking at my own ghost. My phone, an old flip model that Rebecca had always mocked, buzzed in my pocket. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd realized what she'd done. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. "Is this Donald Henley?" The voice was crisp, professional. "Yes." "This is Jennifer Walsh from Clearwater Property Management. Your daughter listed you as a reference for a rental application. Can you confirm your relationship and her employment status?" The words hit me like a physical blow. She was using me as a reference while simultaneously throwing me out on the streets. The calculation of it, the casual cruelty, made me sink onto a nearby bus stop bench. "Sir, are you there?" "I'm here." My voice sounded distant even to me. "So you can confirm that Rebecca Henley is your daughter and that she's employed?" I could have said no. I could have told this woman exactly what Rebecca had done to me, could have sabotaged whatever apartment she was trying to rent. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Yes, she's my daughter. She's employed." After I hung up, I sat at that bus stop for almost an hour, watching people come and go, all of them heading somewhere they belonged. A woman with groceries, a teenager with a backpack full of textbooks, a businessman checking his watch impatiently. All of them had lives. All of them had people who cared whether they made it home safely. That night, I was back on the park bench. The shelter had no openings, and I'd spent my last $20 on the YMCA room the night before. I wrapped myself in an old coat that smelled like motor oil and tried to sleep sitting up to ease the pressure on my chest. Around 3 in the morning, I was awakened by someone shaking my shoulder gently. A homeless man, probably 10 years younger than me, was standing beside the bench with a thermos. "You're new," he said, not unkindly. "Coffee helps with the cold." I accepted the cup gratefully. The coffee was weak and bitter, but it was warm. "How long you been out?" he asked. 4 days. He nodded knowingly. "Family?" "Daughter." "Same." He settled onto the other end of the bench. Mine said I was cramping her style. Apparently having a dad who lost his job wasn't part of her life plan. We sat in comfortable silence, two discarded fathers sharing coffee, and the kind of understanding that comes from mutual abandonment. When morning came, he was gone, leaving only the empty thermos and the knowledge that I wasn't entirely alone in this particular kind of heartbreak. 2 weeks into my new life, I found myself standing outside Miller's Corner store, the same place where I'd bought Rebecca candy when she was 7 years old. My reflection in the window showed a man I barely recognized, hollow cheeks, stubbled chin, clothes that hung loose on my shrinking frame. The heart medication had killed my appetite, and eating regularly wasn't exactly an option when every meal meant choosing between food and a place to sleep. In my pocket, I had exactly $4.37. I'd counted it 3 times, hoping somehow the math would change. It was everything I had left in the world after 2 weeks of buying the cheapest meals I could find and occasionally splurging on a night at the YMCA when the weather got too brutal for the park bench. The store's familiar bell chimed as I walked in, and Mrs. Miller looked up from behind the counter. She'd aged since I'd last been here, her gray hair now completely white, but her eyes still held the same warmth they'd had when she'd slipped Rebecca an extra piece of bubble gum. "Donald?" She squinted, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. "My goodness, what happened to you?" I wanted to lie, to make up some story about temporary setbacks or unexpected circumstances. Instead, I found myself telling her the truth. Maybe it was the medication, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was just the relief of talking to someone who remembered me as more than a homeless man taking up space. "Rebecca put me out after my heart surgery," I said simply. "You've been living rough for a couple weeks now." Mrs. Miller's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, disbelief, then a kind of maternal anger I remembered from when neighborhood kids had picked on Rebecca years ago. "That sweet little girl who used to come in here asking for the prettiest candy for the best daddy?" She shook her head. There must be some mistake. I pulled out the note Rebecca had left with my clothes. The paper was wrinkled now from being folded and unfolded, but the words were still clearly visible. Mrs. Miller read it twice, her lips pressed thin. "People change," I said, taking the note back. "Sometimes they show you who they really are when you're no longer useful to them." Mrs. Miller reached under the counter and pulled out a paper bag. "Take some food on the house." "I can't do that. You helped me move inventory when my back was bad, remember? You never let me pay you then." She started filling the bag with bread, canned soup, crackers. "Consider it a very late payment." I accepted the bag gratefully, but as she worked, my eyes drifted to the lottery ticket display behind the counter. Every Tuesday and Friday for 23 years, I'd bought 2 tickets, one for the regular drawing, one for the Powerball. It had been our tradition, mine and Martha's, and I'd kept it up even after she died. Rebecca used to tease me about it, calling it Dad's retirement plan. The last time I'd bought tickets was the day before my heart attack, 2 months ago. Standing here now, looking at those colorful rectangles of hope, I felt a strange pull. Not because I believed in miracles, but because some rituals die hard even when everything else in your life has crumbled. "Mrs. Miller," I said, reaching into my pocket, "could I get a Powerball ticket?" She paused in her packing. "Donald, are you sure?" "That's $3. $3 out of 437. It was insane. It was the kind of financial decision that homeless people shouldn't make. But Martha had always said that hope was worth investing in, even when, especially when, you had nothing left to lose. Numbers 7, 14, 23, 31, 47, and Powerball 6, I said. The same numbers I'd played for over 2 decades. Martha's birthday, Rebecca's birthday, our anniversary, the day Martha died, my birthday, and 6, because Rebecca had been 6 when she'd first helped me pick numbers. Mrs. Miller printed the ticket and handed it to me along with the bag of food. "Good luck, Donald." I walked out with $1.37 to my name and a slip of paper that would probably end up in the trash. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. Not hope exactly. More like defiance. That night, I found myself back at the duck pond, sharing my bench with the same man who'd given me coffee on my first night out. His name was Frank, I'd learned, and he'd been on the streets for 3 years since his son had kicked him out for being a burden. "You look different tonight," Frank observed as I shared some of Mrs. Miller's crackers with him. "How so?" "Less broken, I guess. What changed?" I pulled out the lottery ticket and showed it to him. "Bought this today with almost the last money I had." Frank laughed, but not unkindly. "Man, you really are new to this. Hope's a luxury we can't afford out here." "Maybe," I said, folding the ticket carefully and putting it back in my wallet. "But despair's expensive, too. Been paying that price for weeks now." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the ducks sleep with their heads tucked under their wings. The park was peaceful at night, almost beautiful, if you could forget you weren't supposed to be living in it. "You ever think about what you'd do?" I asked Frank. "If you won?" "Used to," he said. "First year out here, I'd lie awake planning how I'd buy a house, get my son back, show everyone who'd written me off. Now?" He shrugged. "Now I think I'd just disappear. Go somewhere warm where nobody knows my story." I understood that impulse. The desire to shed your skin like a snake, to walk away from every person who'd ever seen you as less than human. But there was another part of me, a smaller part, that still remembered what it felt like to matter to someone. "I used to take my daughter to this pond when she was little," I said, pointing to the spot where we'd always stood to feed the ducks. "She'd insist on counting them every time, making sure none had gone missing since our last visit. She stopped caring about the ducks. She stopped caring about me." The words came out flatter than I'd intended. Funny how someone can love you completely for 18 years, then turn it off like a light switch. Frank nodded knowingly. "My boy used to call me every Sunday for 34 years. Then his wife decided I was too depressing to have around the grandkids, and suddenly those Sunday calls became a burden instead of a blessing." A police car drove slowly past the park, its searchlight sweeping across the benches. Frank and I both tensed, ready to move if necessary, but the car continued on without stopping. "They'll be by again around 4, Frank said. "Different cop, but same routine. We should probably head to the underpass soon." I fingered the lottery ticket in my pocket, thinking about the drawing that would happen tomorrow night. $47 million, according to the sign in Miller's store. Enough money to solve every problem I had, enough to buy back my dignity, maybe even enough to make Rebecca remember why she'd once loved me. But mostly, I thought about what Frank had said about disappearing. There was something appealing about that idea, not having to face the pity in Mrs. Miller's eyes, not having to explain to doctors and social workers how a man ends up homeless after a lifetime of steady work and responsible choices. Tomorrow night, I'd check the numbers. Not because I expected to win, but because Martha had always said that hope was something you practiced, like a muscle that got stronger with use. And right now, my hope felt as weak and damaged as my 61-year-old heart. I found out I'd won the lottery in the most mundane way possible, sitting on my park bench at 6 in the morning, checking the numbers on my phone while Frank snored softly beside me. The small screen displayed the winning numbers in simple black text: 7, 14, 23, 31, 47, Powerball 6. I stared at the screen for a full minute, then looked at my ticket, then back at the screen. My heart, already damaged from surgery and stress, began hammering in my chest in a way that made me worry I might need another trip to the emergency room. $84 million. The words felt foreign, impossible. I'd never even seen $84,000 in one place, let alone millions. I checked the numbers again, convinced I was misreading something, but they remained stubbornly identical to the ones printed on my crumpled ticket. Frank stirred as I stood up too quickly, the sudden movement making me dizzy. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I might have," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant. I walked to Miller's corner store in a daze, needing confirmation from someone else, needing to be sure I wasn't having some kind of breakdown. Mrs. Miller was just opening up, unlocking the front door as I approached. "Donald, you're up early today." I handed her my ticket with trembling fingers. "Could you check this for me? I think there might be a mistake." She scanned it with the lottery machine, and I watched her face change as the numbers appeared on her screen. Her eyes went wide, then she looked at me, then back at the screen. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my dear God, Donald. Is it real?" She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. $84 million. You won $84 million. I sank into the plastic chair she kept by the counter for elderly customers, feeling like I might pass out. After 3 weeks of sleeping on benches and counting pennies for food, I was suddenly one of the richest people in the state. "What do I do?" I asked her. "I don't even have a bank account anymore. Rebecca cleaned out my savings when she took over my apartment." Mrs. Miller pulled out her phone. "My brother-in-law is a lawyer. Let me call him. Don't talk to anyone else about this until you have legal representation." That's when my old flip phone, which I'd kept on silent for weeks to save battery, began buzzing. I looked at the screen and felt my blood turn cold. Rebecca. Then it buzzed again. Marcus. Then a number I didn't recognize. Then another. "How many people know?" I asked Mrs. Miller. "The Lottery Commission posts winners' names online once they're verified," she said. "Someone must have seen it and started making calls." I looked at my phone, which was now buzzing constantly. 37 missed calls in the past hour. As I watched, the number climbed to 45, then 53. Rebecca had tried 17 times. Marcus, my brother who had been too busy for an emergency call when I was homeless, had tried 12 times. There were numbers I recognized from years ago, cousins I hadn't spoken to since Martha's funeral, old co-workers who'd forgotten I existed after I retired, neighbors who'd watched me load my possessions into garbage bags without offering help. Mrs. Miller's brother-in-law arrived within the hour. James Walsh was a small man with sharp eyes who specialized in estate planning and lottery winnings. Apparently, in a state where people occasionally got lucky, lawyers learned to move fast. "First things first," he said, setting up a temporary office in Mrs. Miller's back room. "We need to establish your legal identity and set up secure banking. Then, we need to think about protection." "Protection from what?" "From everyone who's going to want a piece of your winnings. Family, friends, strangers, charities, investment advisors, long-lost relatives, they'll all come crawling out of the woodwork." As if to prove his point, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number I did recognize, the apartment building where I used to live. Probably Rebecca calling from the landline. "Should I answer it?" I asked. James shook his head firmly. "Not until we've got your affairs in order. Let them wonder." Yowls. Over the next 6 hours, James worked methodically to transform me from homeless Donald to millionaire Donald. New bank accounts, investment structures, legal documents that would protect my winnings from taxes and predators. It was exhausting and surreal, like watching someone else's life being assembled around my body. By afternoon, my phone showed 73 missed calls. Rebecca called 22 times, I told James, scrolling through the log. Marcus called 18 times. "There are people here I haven't talked to in 10 years. "That's normal," he said grimly. "Money makes people remember they love you." The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 weeks ago, I was sleeping in a park, and not one of these people cared whether I lived or died. Now that I could write checks, suddenly I was the most popular man in the state. Mrs. Miller brought me a sandwich around 2 o'clock, sitting down across from me with the maternal concern she'd shown when Rebecca was small. "How are you handling all this?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. I keep waiting to feel happy or excited, but mostly I just feel tired. "That's the shock," she said. "But Donald, this changes everything. You don't have to sleep in the park anymore. You don't have to worry about your next meal or your medication." She was right. But there was something else she wasn't saying, something I was trying not to think about. This money didn't change what Rebecca had done to me. It didn't erase the weeks of sleeping on benches or the cruelty of that note she'd left with my clothes. It just meant that now she wanted something from me again. James finished the paperwork around 5 o'clock and handed me a bank card. "There's $50,000 available immediately," he said. "The rest will be processed over the next few days. Where are you staying tonight?" I almost said the park bench, then realized that part of my life was over. I could afford a hotel room. I could afford the finest hotel in the city. "I don't know," I admitted. "Might I suggest somewhere quiet, away from your old neighborhood? Give yourself time to think before you decide how to handle all those phone calls." I nodded, looking at the bank card in my hand. It was just a piece of plastic, but it represented more security than I'd ever had in my life. The old Donald would have immediately started planning how to help Rebecca, how to make things right with Marcus, how to be generous with everyone who'd suddenly remembered my existence. But the old Donald had never been thrown away like garbage by his own daughter. My phone buzzed again. This time, surprisingly, it was a text message instead of a call. "Daddy, please call me. I made a terrible mistake. I love you so much. Please come home." "Rebecca." I showed the message to James, who read it with the expression of someone who'd seen this particular performance many times before. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I looked at the message again, studying each word. 3 weeks ago, those words would have healed everything. They would have been exactly what I needed to hear to forgive and forget, and pretend none of this had happened. Now they just felt like another calculation, another manipulation from someone who saw me as a means to an end. "I want to disappear," I said, echoing what Frank had told me about his own dreams. "At least for a while." James nodded approvingly. "Smart choice. Let them wait. Let them wonder. You've got time now to decide who deserves to be part of your new life." As I walked out of Miller's store that evening, my phone showed 86 missed calls. Rebecca had left 12 voicemails, each one more frantic than the last. Marcus had sent a long text about family obligations and working together. For the first time in 3 weeks, I turned my phone completely off. I had 84 million reasons to make them wait. I spent my first night as a millionaire in a modest hotel room 30 miles from the city, staring at the ceiling and listening to the silence. No Frank snoring beside me, no police cars making their rounds, no fear of being moved along. Just quiet and the strange weight of knowing I never had to sleep rough again. But I couldn't escape the buzzing in my head, the knowledge that my phone, sitting silent on the nightstand, was probably full of messages from people who'd suddenly remembered I existed. On the third day, I finally turned it back on. 147 missed calls, 63 voicemails, 89 text messages. Rebecca alone had called 42 times. I scrolled through her messages, watching her desperation escalate with each one. The first few were apologetic, claiming she'd made a terrible mistake and begging me to come home. By message 15, she was promising to take care of me, to be the daughter I'd always wanted. By message 30, she was crying on my voicemail about how much she missed me and how she'd never meant to hurt me. Marcus's messages followed a different pattern. They started with casual concern, as if he was just checking in on his brother, then progressed to increasingly urgent demands that I call him back immediately for important family business. James had warned me this would happen. He'd seen it dozens of times with lottery winners, the sudden outpouring of love from people who'd been nowhere to be found during the hard times. But knowing it was predictable didn't make it feel less disgusting. I decided to test them. On Thursday morning, I called Rebecca back. "Daddy." Her voice was bright with relief and something else, something that sounded like practiced gratitude. "Oh God, I've been so worried." "Where have you been?" "Around," I said simply. "I need to see you. I need to apologize properly. That note I left, I was just scared, you know? Scared about the medical bills and taking care of you after your surgery. I panicked. The lie came so smoothly, so believably, that for a moment I almost bought it myself. This was the Rebecca who'd perfected the art of explaining away her mistakes, who'd convinced teachers and bosses and boyfriends that her failures were always someone else's fault. The medical bills were covered by insurance, I said. You knew that. A pause. Well, yes, but there were other expenses, and I thought, you thought I was going to be a burden. That's what you wrote, a sick leech. Oh, I was wrong. Her voice took on that little girl quality she'd used to get out of trouble when she was young. I was so wrong, Daddy. Please come home so I can make it up to you. Where's home, Rebecca? You threw my things on the street. You cleaned out my bank account. You changed the locks. Another pause, longer this time. I kept all your things safe. Everything's exactly where you left it. The lock thing was just a misunderstanding with the building manager. The casual way she lied, the complete absence of acknowledgement for what she'd actually done, made my chest tighten with more than just heart trouble. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. Marcus called back within the hour. Donald, Jesus Christ, where have you been? Rebecca's been calling me hysterical, saying you're not answering your phone. I'm answering it now. We need to talk. This lottery thing, you're going to need help managing this kind of money. I've got connections, investment advisors, tax people. Family should stick together on something this big. There it was. Not congratulations, not I'm sorry you were homeless while I was too busy to take your calls, just straight to the money. When did you last talk to me before this week? I asked him. Silence. When, Marcus? I don't... Look, that's not the point. The point is, you're going to need guidance and I'm your brother. We should meet this weekend. You didn't even know I'd had heart surgery. What? When did you... I hung up, but I wasn't done testing them yet. That afternoon, I drove to Rebecca's apartment, my old apartment, and parked across the street. I didn't go up. I just sat in the car I'd bought that morning, a modest Honda that wouldn't attract attention, and watched. Rebecca came out around 4 o'clock, dressed in clothes I'd never seen before. Expensive clothes. She was talking animatedly on her phone, gesturing with her free hand in a way that suggested she was excited about something. I followed her to an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place she'd never been able to afford on her sporadic employment income. Through the window, I watched her meet with a man in an expensive suit, someone I didn't recognize, but who had the polished look of a financial advisor or lawyer. They talked for over an hour, with Rebecca showing him something on her phone and the man taking notes. When they parted, he handed her a business card, and they shook hands like people who'd just made a deal. I sat in my car watching my daughter walk away with a spring in her step, and finally understood what James had meant about protection. Rebecca wasn't planning to apologize or make amends. She was planning to get her hands on my money. That evening, she called me again. Daddy, I've been thinking about what you need. You're going to need help managing your new situation. I found this wonderful financial planner who specializes in helping lottery winners. His name is David Carlisle, and he's got incredible credentials. David Carlisle, the man from the restaurant. You've been busy, I said. I just want what's best for you. We could meet with him together as a family, father and daughter, making smart decisions about your future. My future? Our future, she corrected quickly. I mean, I want to be part of your life again. I want to take care of you the way I should have after your surgery. The script was perfect, but I'd watched her rehearse it over lunch with her new financial advisor. I'd seen the handshake that sealed whatever arrangement they'd made. What did David Carlisle promise you, Rebecca? The silence stretched so long, I thought she'd hung up. I don't know what you mean. I saw you having lunch with him today. I saw you show him something on your phone, probably pictures of me, or maybe bank statements you'd snooped through when you cleaned out my apartment. I saw him give you his card. Daddy, you're being paranoid. What's his commission? What's your cut? I would never. You threw me away when you thought I was dying and worthless. Now you want to manage my money. Do you even hear yourself? Her voice changed then, dropping the little girl act and taking on the sharp edge I remembered from our worst fights when she was a teenager. You think you're so smart now that you've got money? You think that changes what you are? You're still a sick old man who can't take care of himself. You still need family, whether you want to admit it or not. There it was, the real Rebecca, the one who'd written that note and thrown my clothes on the street. You're right, I said calmly. I do need family. That's why I'm going to go find some. I hung up and turned off my phone again. The next morning I drove back to Riverside Park one more time. Frank was still there, sitting on our old bench, feeding breadcrumbs to the ducks from a bag he'd probably gotten from the mission. Well, I'll be damned, he said when he saw me approaching. If it isn't the millionaire. Thought you'd forgotten about us little people. I sat down beside him, and for a few minutes we just watched the ducks paddle around the pond in their eternal search for food. You were right, I told him, about disappearing, about going somewhere warm where nobody knows your story. He nodded knowingly. Family came calling, did they? Like vultures to roadkill. They always do. He tossed another handful of crumbs into the water. Question is, what are you going to do about it? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the endless list of missed calls and messages from people who'd ignored me when I had nothing and wanted to manage me now that I had everything. I'm going to give them exactly what they gave me, I said. Frank smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. Now that sounds like justice. I disappeared on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 months after winning the lottery. No dramatic goodbye, no final confrontation with Rebecca or Marcus. I simply packed the few belongings that mattered to me, left my hotel room, and drove west toward a life nobody could find. The decision had been building for weeks as I watched my family's desperation escalate into something uglier. Rebecca had started showing up at places she thought I might be. The hospital for my follow-up appointments, Miller's Corner Store, even the park where I'd been homeless. Marcus had hired a private investigator to track my movements, claiming he was concerned about my mental state and whether I was competent to handle such a large financial responsibility. They'd both consulted lawyers about having me declared mentally incompetent due to my age and recent medical trauma. The papers had been filed, the hearings were scheduled. That's when I knew it was time to go. James Walsh had helped me prepare for this moment without realizing it. Over the months of setting up my financial security, he'd created a web of trusts and accounts that would function perfectly well without my physical presence. Automated payments, investment managers who'd never met me in person, legal structures that protected my money from family members who might claim I was unfit to manage it myself. I'd learned something valuable during those weeks of watching Rebecca and Marcus scheme. Money doesn't just buy things, it buys choices. And I chose to become a ghost. My new life started in a small coastal town in Northern California, where the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, and nobody asked questions about where you'd come from. I rented a modest house 3 blocks from the beach, paid 6 months in advance in cash, and introduced myself to my neighbors as Don Miller, a retired railroad worker who'd saved enough to spend his golden years by the sea. It wasn't entirely a lie. I had worked for the railroad, and I was spending my golden years by the sea. The millions of dollars part simply wasn't anyone's business. The house was everything my old apartment hadn't been, filled with light, surrounded by flowers, peaceful. I furnished it slowly, choosing each piece carefully, instead of just accepting whatever was cheapest or most practical. A comfortable reading chair by the window, a kitchen table where I could eat meals without rushing, a bed that was actually wide enough for an adult. For the first time in my adult life, every decision I made was purely for my own comfort and happiness. I developed routines that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or schedules. Morning walks on the beach while the town was still sleeping. Afternoons reading books I'd never had time for when I was working 2 jobs to support Rebecca's dreams. Evenings cooking simple meals and eating them while watching the sunset paint the ocean in impossible colors. The simplest pleasures felt revolutionary after a lifetime of putting everyone else first. I made friends slowly, the way people do in small towns where everyone has come from somewhere else seeking peace. There was Margaret, who ran the local bookstore and recommended novels she thought I'd enjoy. Tom, who worked at the marina and taught me how to fish from the pier. Sarah, who owned the coffee shop and always had a warm smile and a fresh pastry when I stopped by for my morning coffee. None of them knew about the money. To them, I was just Don, the quiet man who'd moved to town and seemed to be healing from some old wound that wasn't their business to pry into. The healing was real, but it didn't happen quickly. For months, I'd wake up with the phantom weight of responsibility pressing down on my chest. The feeling that someone needed something from me, that I was failing in my duties as a father and provider. I'd reach for my phone to check for missed calls from Rebecca before remembering that Rebecca no longer had my number. Nobody did. The guilt was the hardest part. 61 years of believing that family came first, that a good man sacrificed his own needs for the people he loved, didn't disappear just because those people had revealed their true nature. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I was being cruel, if maybe Rebecca really had changed, if Marcus truly was concerned about my well-being. Then I'd remember the cruelty of that note on the sidewalk, the calculation in Rebecca's eyes when she talked about financial planning, the complete absence of love in any of their voices when they weren't trying to manipulate me. And I'd sleep peacefully again. James called me occasionally on a secure line to update me on my investments and to let me know that my family was still looking for me. Rebecca had hired 3 different private investigators. Marcus had contacted the FBI, claiming I might have been kidnapped or killed for my lottery winnings. They'd both given tearful interviews to local news stations about their missing father and brother. They're painting themselves as heartbroken family members who just want to know you're safe, James told me during one of our conversations. Are they still trying to have me declared incompetent? Hard to do when they can't prove you exist anymore. Your medical records are sealed, your financial affairs are in order, and you're clearly capable of managing your own life. The courts aren't interested in their theories about lottery winner psychology. I'd been gone 8 months when I received the letter. It arrived at a P.O. box I maintained in a town 50 miles away, forwarded through a series of mail services that made it impossible to trace back to my actual location. The return address was Rebecca's apartment, my old apartment, and my name was written on the envelope in her careful script. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that might have broken my heart if I'd still had one to break. Daddy, I know you're alive somewhere. I know you can read this. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for the note, for throwing you away, for only caring when you had money. I'm sorry for not being the daughter you deserved. I don't want your money anymore. I just want you to come home. The apartment is exactly like you left it. I kept all your things. I water the plants you used to take care of. Please come back. I promise I'll be better. I promise I'll take care of you the way I should have. Love, Rebecca. I read it twice, then walked down to the beach and let the ocean wind tear the paper from my hands. It was a beautiful letter. It might even have been sincere, but it was 8 months too late and a lifetime too little. I'd already found my home, and it wasn't with people who loved me conditionally. 2 years have passed since I disappeared, and I've never been happier. My heart, both the physical one and the metaphorical one, has healed in ways I never expected. I wake up each morning grateful for the sun on my face and the sound of waves outside my window. I go to bed each night, knowing that nobody needs anything from me except what I freely choose to give. I've made anonymous donations to the homeless shelter where I once waited for a bed. I've quietly paid medical bills for neighbors who couldn't afford them. I've funded scholarships for young people whose families believe in their dreams instead of seeing them as investments. But I've done all of it without fanfare, without recognition, without anyone trying to take credit for my generosity or manage my choices. Last month, Margaret from the bookstore mentioned that she was worried about her grandson, a young man who'd been thrown out by his parents for reasons that sounded depressingly familiar. Without thinking, I told her that if the boy needed a place to stay while he got back on his feet, I had a spare room and could use help with yard work. Danny moved in 2 weeks later. He's 23, quiet, carrying the same wounded bewilderment I recognized from my own reflection during those first homeless nights. He doesn't know about the lottery money, but he does know about rejection from family members who were supposed to love unconditionally. We don't talk much about our pasts. Instead, we work together in the garden I've planted behind the house, Growing vegetables we'll share for dinner. He's teaching me about modern music, and I'm teaching him how to cook the simple meals Martha used to make. It's not the family I was born into, but it's the family I've chosen. Sometimes when I'm sitting on my porch watching the sunset, I think about Rebecca and Marcus still searching for me, still convinced that money is the answer to every problem. I wonder if they've learned anything from my disappearance, if they've taken the time to examine what they lost when they chose greed over love. But mostly, I don't think about them at all. I'm too busy living the life I never knew I wanted. Quiet, simple, mine. The life of a man who finally learned that the most radical thing you can do is choose your own peace over everyone else's expectations. The lottery gave me $84 million, but disappearing gave me something worth infinitely more. The freedom to be exactly who I am, loved by people who don't need anything from me except my presence. And for the first time in 63 years, that feels like enough.